How's it going?
Morning, good. How you doing?
What's this?
I picked that up for you.
A cake? It's great,
Oh,
thanks.
No, so much better.
And this is cabin air filter thingy. I don't have a cabin air filter in my car.
I do. I mean, my car's starting to smell like yours, so have at it.
So I got this Purelator Breathe Easy cabin air filter, and I'm gonna put it in your car. Well, it's gonna have to be for another video, but all right, I can do that.
Now?
No. Okay, I'm finally back with another video. I was away at the SEMA show a few weeks ago. That was a really crazy show, took a lot of my time up, and I hopefully will have a video up on that shortly. But in the meantime, I got a T5 transmission video I'm going to do. And what's going to be different about this particular video is that this was a unit that I built, I think it was in the mid-1990s. It was called a JT5 Rally clutchless transmission. It was spur type gears with face tooth contact type of gears, and it would kind of go in any gear at any time, at any speed, without a clutch. It was a really great idea, but unfortunately, the problem was if you had bad drivers, they might go from fifth, instead of going from fifth down to fourth, they would actually go from fifth into second and blow the transmission up. So most of the boxes that are still out there are running fine with good drivers. And what I'm doing on this particular job is I'm going to convert it to a fully synchronized racing gear set from Gforce transmissions. The Gforce transmission is an extra close ratio T5 gear set. It's got a modular counter gear, but this close ratio set is very hard to get into the case. I'm going to start from the ground up with a brand new case. I'm going to show you what it takes to even get this gear in the case to make it fit. Like what I have to do to a little finesse it into the case. And then we're going to just build this whole transmission up, okay? So let's get to it. Should be pretty interesting, a little bit different this time. So this is a JT5 Rally clutchless gear set. I had removed the input shaft a long time ago. It's been sitting in my shop for quite a while. It's an 8-lug dog ring type design. Some people call these face-plated gears because they are engaging along the face profile of the tooth. It's not a lug design that's straight like this, so it's kind of a face tooth contact. Again, it's an 8-lug system. Basically, spins, boom, goes into gear like that. No clutch needed. It's got a little bit of a back cut to it like this, so that when it goes in, it kind of locks in place. This is a very good design. Unfortunately, the problem is, again, it will go in any gear at any time. So if the person isn't careful and downshifts into the wrong gear, it will go in and blow up. The old design had this 8-lug tooth profile that was part of the gear. I see it's one piece. It was machined to the gear. The new design on the later boxes was a 2-piece system that the lug system splined onto it. And it was actually a 6-lug system, so it actually even shifted faster. Again, it was a very good design, but again, too much liability, too many people driving it the wrong way. I'm going to be replacing this transmission's gears with a Gforce close ratio gear set. And you can see the counter gear is modular, slides together like this. And the idea is that because you can put the gears and slide them together, you can have wider teeth because there's not enough room. So this will actually go like that, and you'll be able to get a larger tooth profile across both faces. Take this off. So over here, you can see the difference in the tooth profiles. On the right is the conventional Borg-Warner or Tremec 3rd-speed gear, and on the left is the Gforce gear. And you can see the width of the tooth over here is much wider, it's much stronger. And also you can see that the helix angle has been reduced, so we kind of call this a semi-helical gear set. And you can see it's just slightly wider, but difference in the alloy and the shot peening and the polishing makes for a stronger gear set. Input shaft is going to be a 26-spline input shaft. Same treatment to the gears. Again, wider tooth profiles. These are probably like a 20-degree pitch angle as opposed to a 14-degree angle. And here is second gear. You can see same treatment, same tooth profile as the 3rd-speed gear. First gear, the same thing. Nice and shiny. Oh, very pretty, huh? So for this build, I'm going to start with a brand new Ford T5 Royal Class main case. It's completely new. It's completely bare. The only thing that comes with this case is the magnet. That's it. There's no Welch plugs in it, there's no bearings, nothing. And it's best to start this way because I'm gonna have to do some grinding. So the counter gear stub shaft, the problem with these close ratio sets is that they can't go in the case completely. The gear cannot make a complete turn to seat fully in the case and move forward into the front bearing when it's installed. So here we are working with the bare case, and you can see that there's some interference issues. Let me show you on the other one what's going on. So because we need that gear to kind of fit in here and kind of come through like this, we're going to have to bevel the inside edge of this bore. So by just beveling this bore a little bit and then taking the gear and putting a little bit of an edge on it, we'll be able to sneak this gear into the case like this. It's okay to bevel the inside edge of this bore because the bearing race, when it's in place, doesn't even go along this edge. It only goes about halfway into this bore. It kind of protrudes outside of it a little bit and about midway through it. So it's okay to relieve the inside edge of this bore. It doesn't affect any strength or any holding power of the bore. But that's part of the process of the first step in setting up the close ratio gears in this box. Again, because it will not go in like this. It's impossible to get it in. One of the problems with companies that manufacture gears is they're really quick to kind of sharp peen and polish gears, but they forget to deburr them. And I don't know if you can see this clearly, but there's actually little raised edges over here that the polishing is not going to take out. They're very sloppy with their workmanship. They tend to bang a lot of the gears up and then do all this prep work, but you can see here this tooth has got a bit of a raised edge on it over here. And if we go around here some more, we'll see some other teeth that are a little bit banged up. You can see this one over here has got a good shot in it. So these gears are going to have to be deburred before I put them in the box. Look at this one. You see this raised edge on it? So they do all this nice polishing work, but they never actually deburr the gears. And so it's kind of, I call it sloppy material handling. Here you can see this nice raised portion over here on this tooth where they just simply overlook it. They probably throw the gear in a pile, let it bang against another gear, and then they all need to be cleaned up. So part of the problem is that you'll go out and spend $1,500 on a brand new high-performance gear set, and the people who are manufacturing it just bang the gears against one another and throw it in the box. So even though these gears are expensive and they look pretty, you still have to go over every gear and deburr them. It's very critical in putting together a performance transmission. So you can see how I bevel the inside edge to clear the gear, but I've left enough material for the outside race of the bearing to be held properly. You can see where I beveled the back edge of the first speed gear to make it go into the case easier. And it doesn't have to be that critical. And then what I do is I dress the edges up to clean up any of the burrs from grinding it so it's nice and smooth all the way around. And that's all you have to do for the gear, okay? So now let's see how it fits. Now I beveled this back edge over here and the gear. Put it in. There you go. That's going to be perfect. So that's what we have to do to make this work. Then it will slide into the bearing when it's in place. So the 5th gear rides in this area and it spins around while the car is running and not in 5th gear. And what you want to do is put flats 180 degrees roughly on both sides, about 10 thousandths deep, to promote oil flow, because you want the oil to kind of circulate into this groove, and it's going to be pumped into this little hole and out again and circulate around. So you want to have a little bit better oil flow. So what I'm going to do now is take my rotary tool and put flats on both sides. Here, flip it around, and then do another 2 over here. A little bit. Just some flats. Here. You do it like this too. So you can see those little flats that I put in there. That's going to help oil circulate around the 5th gear and prevent it from seizing up. We've seen some of the gears seize up in the past. That little trick helps. So I just want to show you how I cut that 45-degree edge on the 1st gear section and deburred the gear. This is what it looks like. And it's ready to install. Okay, so I'm going to start putting that transmission together now. And first thing I want to tell you is that I am putting this transmission together completely from scratch. In other words, a bare case. I'm going to build it up with every little component part. So this is a little bit different video than what I've done before, because we're starting with every little component and building the whole transmission and putting it together. So hopefully you'll pick up a few cool tips on how I put together these T5 transmissions with Gforce gears. We're going to start with the main case. We're going to start putting in the front counter gear, cup and bearing, build it up with the reverse idler shaft and reverse idler, assemble the counter gear, set the preload in it, and then get that whole main case section done and out of the way. Let's do that first. All right, so the T5 transmission has a front counter gear bearing cup that's kind of special because it's got this sealed in on it. And what you want to do is put this little O-ring on it like this, make sure it's in place, that it's not twisted at all. And then we're going to just put sealant around this whole thing. All right, so I use this anaerobic gasket maker from Dynatex, part number 49477. It works really well. It's like crazy glue, if you want to think of it that way. It's an anaerobic gel, and what it'll do is it'll simply solidify with the absence of air. And I kind of put on quite a bit of it because it kind of acts as a lubricant for the O-ring as well. Then I'm going to take the front of the case and put some in the bore like this. Right? So what I'll do is I'll lay this in here and I'll try to see if I can get it started by hand. You don't want to cut the O-ring. When I'm checking to see if the O-ring didn't break or anything, I'm running my fingers around here just to make sure that the O-ring is seated in the bore. Then I'll continue gradually tapping it in. Now when I flip this over, we're going to have all the sealant exposed over here. They got pushed out, and we just wipe this down. Now it's also a good time to put the plug in the shift rail hole over here. And what I do with that is I'll take just a little dab of anaerobic gel and put it on the outside like this, just to kind of catch the edge. So I just put a little bit of a sealant around the edge of this hole. And this is a 3/4 inch concave plug, and they just kind of fit in there like this. And the idea of these plugs is that once you hammer them flat, they will expand, and then they'll lock in place. You want it to make sure it's flush as well, that it's not protruding. And what I usually do is I wipe everything down. Then I'll take a punch and just put several little stake marks just to make sure that plug can never come out. Just like that. Now what I usually do is I check inside here to see that any of the sealant didn't squish out into the bore, and then what I'll do is I'll clean that with some paper towel. So I'll do is I'll put some paper towel in here just like this and make sure that the bore is cleaned up of any sealant. That looks nice and clean. So when you install a reverse idler, of course you want to make sure that the gear has no burrs on it, which this one looks really nice. Start the idler pin in from the back, like this. I'm going to put the idler gear in, catch it on the shaft. Then there's a thick O-ring that goes in front of it. I think this O-ring is there just to kind of cushion the gear from making noise when it hits the back side of the case, so it can't do that. You want to slide it in, and you want to make sure that this hole is facing upward so that you can put in the dowel pin to hold it in place. When you put this pin in, it only needs to go in about halfway. You don't want to push it flush. So you just want to get this pin below this edge. That's fine. So I've deburred the counter gear stub shaft and the modular 3/4 section. But before I assemble them, I know this sounds crazy, but I put a lot of this anaerobic gel on these splines, because this will actually help keep this thing tight and reinforced in place better, because some of these fits are kind of sloppy, and I like doing this. If you have to take it apart, you're going to have to heat it up, but it's well worth it. Because the problem with this setup is that the spline ends here and the third gear is over here. So it's almost like the third gear is not really driving with a spline underneath it, and I really don't like that design. I'll show you what I mean by that. So you can see that this is the 3rd-speed gear, and you can see that there's no spline underneath the gear itself. The spline is in front of the gear. And to me, that can tend to have a twisting action against the gear. So I try to kind of reinforce everything as much as I can. Believe it or not, this stuff works pretty good. So we just want to get it over here a little bit like that. Then we're going to assemble it. And just tap it in place. It's down nice and solid. This isn't going to go anywhere now. So now that the counter gear is seated, you want to put the spacer that they give you on there. It doesn't fit the way it's supposed to, like really tight, but you just kind of got to center it. Now, what I've noticed in the past in building these types of transmissions is that this bearing that goes on here just drops in place, which is not cool. So I'm using the 680 Loctite. It's a bearing mount. It's designed to kind of replace press fits. I'll put a good liberal amount on the inner ring of the bearing and then drop it in place. All right. And then I'll wipe off the excess. Now all these Gforce gears are like this for some reason. Don't know why. But I'll let this sit for a bit before I put this counter gear. I'll let it sit for about 20 minutes before I put the counter gear in the transmission. All right, so now that I've got the case beveled out, counter gear beveled in, also note that that bearing is on there pretty solid from the retaining compound. It won't come off now. That's what we want. Now, sometimes when you put these things in and you have a bearing in there in a race, it still may be a little bit tight to get in the case. And you might have to just rotate it and turn it a bit until it drops into place. Like that. So we've got it dropped into place now with all our clearance. Then you want to flip it over. And you want to work on the rear bearing now. So I've got the counter gear situated in the case. It spins nice and easy. I'm going to drop down the rear cone bearing. And notice that this bearing just drops on, it doesn't press in. So again, we're going to have to use some of that Loctite retaining compound, the 680 on it. But right now I just want to set it up, so I don't really want to have the compound on here. You're going to have to tap in the race. When it's flush, it'll spin, okay? Now, these are my stabilizer plates. We're going to start with the old shim that was on there. Put that on. We can just hold it down. We can see we have a lot of movement, okay? Too much movement. So, a lot of times these Gforce gears, the tolerances are very off in regards to the shimming. So, I have my peel in place shims, which are a single shim and a peelable shim. You see this over here? And I peel them down. I have a video on this. I'll leave a link on YouTube on how these shims work. But I'm going to peel this down. To be very careful you don't cut your fingers with these. Put this on here. It's going to be two shims. Again, a solid service shim and a peelable shim. And then what I'm doing is I'm checking to see how it feels if it just touches the case. And I'll try this out first. If it's too tight, then I'll go ahead and remove one more layer. And that's the idea behind the peelable shim, is that you can do it layer at a time to get the perfect preload. I'm looking to try to get 4 inch-pounds of drag here with this. So what you don't want to do is have the counter gear lock up on you. So I'm gradually turning it down, seeing how it spins. You can feel it's going to start being too tight. Too tight. I think taking one more shim down will do the trick. The idea is you want to have some sort of preload on this and no end play. So what I'll do is, I'll lay it down on its side. I'll shock the back of it lightly with a hammer. It feels good, has a nice drag to it. I like the way this feels. There's no end play. It's a smooth rotation. It's not choppy. It's good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these again, put new hardware on the plate, with thread locker on the hardware and retaining compound on that bearing. Now that I have the shimming set up and the preload where I want it to be, this is all dialed in now. Two pieces. So I'm going to put that retaining compound on the inner ring of the bearing, like I did the other one. You want to put it on the inner ring so that when you put it in place, it's going to squash out towards the back and not towards the inside. You want to wipe off any excess because this stuff can seize up the gear. We're going to put our peelable shims in place. Laid a stabilizer plate on here. This is a product of mine. Some of these new bolts, and these bolts are 8mm threads by 20mm length. I use this kind of pump type thread locker. It doesn't run. It's kind of like a gel, like the sealant. I torqued these to 20 foot-pounds. Once they're all torqued into place, you want to flip it on its side. Of course, you want to just shock the counter gear and make sure the braces are seated. And everything spins nice and free the way I like it. There's one little other thing we have to do on this counter gear, and that's put the plastic funnel in place. I just use a 10mm socket and tap the funnel in place. So I'm going to use a brand new pivot because I'm building kind of like a new transmission, and the new pivots already come with a special thread locker and sealing compound on them. Once these pivots are in place, they're very hard to remove unless you heat them up. So I'm going to just put this in and just start it. Now they use a T50 drive on these, but before you sink it in all the way, what you want to do is also catch the 5th reverse pivot fork on there. Just put it in place. Now normally, if you're doing a regular rebuild, this portion does not have to be removed at all. So you want to torque this down to, we're going to torque it down to 50 foot-pounds. But in really order to leverage this properly, the best way to do it is put it on its face like this, okay? And you can kind of see that sealant squeezing out over here. There we go. So now that we got the pivot arm in place, you want to put the retaining clip in. And the retaining clip has to kind of get fished under the groove. And so a lot of times if you try to push it in by hand, you can do it like this, but you may want to be careful because you can cut your fingers. But once you get it started, just gently tap it in like this. And then what I do is I kind of orientate it so it's facing upward and the slot is facing down, just so it can't ever drop out. And now it's in, can't come out. There you go. So you can see we have the cluster gear in place, reverse either shaft in place, pin, and the fifth reverse pivot in place. Next step is to put the fifth reverse rail in place with a new fork and spring. Okay, so I got two rails over here. The rail on the right is the old style fifth reverse rail, and this is a newer style reverse rail on the left. The difference is, if you notice, that this rail has flats in it on both sides, and the new rails, they don't have flats, but they have this kind of little hole in there that goes from here to here. You have to understand that when you put a shaft into a blind hole in a transmission, the oil has to escape somewhere, otherwise you'll get a hydraulic lock. So this particular rail uses this kind of little valley in here and an exhaust port, where this just has a flat. The problem with these new rails, though, even though they give you a 360-degree surface area around them, I grind a little flat in the rail, because if this hole ever gets plugged with dirt or something like that, the unit will not shift properly. So I always put a little slot on both ends of the rail, and I use the new rails. So I'm replacing the old rail, which is kind of beat up anyway, with a new rail. So what you do is you simply lay the fork on the reverse eyelet and catch it into the fifth reverse arm. You take the spring, you catch it on the lip, there's a lip over here, of the fork, and onto the peg over here in the case. The rail position is kind of simple. You have a little dowel location for the shift fork. Don't confuse this with the dowel location, or this one with the dowel location. This is the one for the reverse shift fork. And the roller goes towards the outside like this. So you're going to slide this in. You're going to fish it through the fork and the spring, and then rotate it into place like this. Now what you want to do is also check your action. Make sure it works well. And then you're there. So this is your whole main case assembly done. Now we're ready to do the gear train.